No one hated war more than I did. I was as pacifist as they come, which was great since war wasn't something I had to worry about. I'd watch my classmates line up at the folding tables during lunch, saying yes to buzzcut recruiters who smelled like starch and old coffee, who promised rank and meaning to kids who barely knew how to do their taxes. It wasn't my scene. I liked quiet corners and bad guitars and arguments about ethics. I liked the small piece of a slow morning and the long piece of not owing my life to an institution that survives by making enemies. I'm telling you that so you understand how insane it felt when the letter showed up. The envelope looked like it had grown a scar. The stamp wasn't a stamp. Not really. More like a wreath of knife-thin glyphs braided into a circle. It felt wrong when I rubbed it, like cool metal under paper. I remember the day's smell, mop water in the dorm hallway, stale chip dust on my fingers, a ribbon of eucalyptus from the trees by the quad. I remember thinking, some freshman comms kid got creative with a prank. I slid it open with my nail, and the tone hit me first, that officious rhythm you only hear when a bureaucracy talks. My brain went straight to traffic violation, and I felt my stomach get hot with the kind of anger you have when you know you're about to get charged money for existing. But it wasn't that. Greetings, Mr. Allen. It started all polite dread. Please be advised that, in light of our nation's escalating war, I laughed out loud at the word nation. Which nation? The nation of what the hell is this? Then I saw it. Extorvis. I'd never heard of it, but the letter expected me to react like I'd grown up saluting its flag. It told me to report, gave me a token, a map. It told me to sort my affairs, and said I might be deployed for anywhere between 2 and 2,000 years. The number sat there like a dead thing on a plate. I brought it back up to my room like it was going to bite. My roommate Brett sat in his desk chair, leaning back, toes hooked on the drawer handles like always. Button-up shirt, shellacked hair, his reflection in our blackened TV screen. "What's that?" he asked. "More proof that no one here learns geography," I said, and handed it over like a hot pan. He read, brows rising, then handed it back. "Godspeed and extorvis, bro," he said, completely unserious, and thumped the letter against my chest. "You'll be their most annoying private." We laughed, but it wasn't a clean laugh. The thing sat on my desk between my mug and a pile of readings. I tried to forget it existed, and it didn't let me. I swear I heard the paper shift at night, like it was settling. I stuck a Post-it to my monitor, make a scan of that weird letter, thinking I'd flay whatever genius made this. The stamp smell seeped into the room. Metallic cold. Every time Brett sprayed deodorant, it smelled like it hit a wall and slid off. Extorvis, I said to my laptop one night. Wikipedia blinked back and not found. I zoomed out on maps until the continents became green smears and oceans went blank blue, like a screensaver. Nothing. In the library, I rolled the globe and thought, goofy, could it be on the bottom? Like a sticker under a chair? I knew it was stupid. I still checked. 3 days later, the letter had sunk in my brain like a tick, and I walked down to the post office with it folded in my back pocket. The place smelled like rubber bands and damp cardboard. A fan chopped the air with a lazy death. The clerk at the counter had the look of someone whose soul clocked out at noon. "Hey," I said, casual, because if I let the panic in my voice, it would become real. "Someone thinks they're funny." I slid the envelope. "Can you, tell me who sent this?" "Extorvis. Is that a thing?" He didn't smile. He didn't do anything at first. He touched the stamp with his index finger, didn't press, just hovered. He went pale in a way that wasn't theatrical. "Where'd you get this?" he asked. "My mailbox, man." He looked past me. No one else waited in line. He leaned in like the glass window between us could hear. "It's legitimate," he said. A whisper that wasn't a whisper, too firm. "If you were me, I'd go." "That's absurd," I said. I wanted to throw his stapler. "It's not even a real. It isn't a real anything here," he cut me off. "But it's real enough." He slid the envelope back with 2 fingers like he didn't want to catch it. "You don't want them to come get you. You want to go to them. If you have to go at all." He straightened, and like he'd stepped back into a script, he added, flat voice, Failure to comply is a federal offense. I stared at him for 2 beats, waiting for a grin, a wink, anything. He called, "Next," to a phantom line, and I walked out with my throat dry. The logical brain tells you what's possible. The animal brain tells you what's going to happen. Mine started trying to bolt. I posted on 3 forums under names I'd never use again. I wrote, "Anyone heard of Extorvis?" Then I got a letter, and finally, because the quiet was worse than humiliation, I'm being drafted by a country that doesn't exist. I hit refresh like I was trying to resuscitate the page. When a message came, it wasn't a reply. It was a private ping. "Are they drafting you too?" The sender was Hermit99. I typed, "Yeah." My hand shook. I felt stupid admitting it, like telling the internet there was a monster under my bed. "Can we meet?" He wrote, with an address. Everything you know about not meeting strangers doesn't evaporate. It just hits a different gravity when the other option is admitting you might be going mad alone. The address was an old warehouse on the edge of the city where the river dives under the highway and the wind chews plastic bags into confetti. I went at noon. Even daylight makes certain buildings look like they're thinking about you in a bad way. The front doors were open an inch. Inside, sunlight came through ragged skylights and lay in dusty slabs on the concrete. A man hunched over a laptop that needed a defibrillator, long hair in a weak ponytail, beard like late-season hay. "You're Hugo?" he asked, eyes lancing up quick. "Yeah," I said. "You're Leroy," he said tight. He pointed at the door. "Shut it." I did. Every sound went louder after the door clicked. My breath, the little word from his fan, the laptop's wheeze. "Show me your letter." Not a question. I handed it over, and he read too fast, like he'd seen the words so many times they were burnt in. "What is this?" I said. "What is any of this?" "Family," he said, bitter like spitting a seed. "You think you're clean because you were born here? You're not clean. Some ancestor signed a thing, or fucked a thing, or stood too near a thing when the worlds bled into each other, and now your line glows on their census. You're telling me I'm a citizen of Extorvis," I said, and saying it felt like stepping off a curb I didn't see. "Because my great-great-great, because someone you'll never know did something you can't understand," he said, calmer, teacher voice, like he'd had to talk himself through this first. "My family knew. My grandmother wore her hair long to cover the mark behind her ear. She taught me what little she knew. When I got my letter," he stopped. He was good stopping. "Okay," I said, for the sake of moving. "Let's say I believe you. Why me? Why now?" He lifted the letter and tapped the fine print on the back with a nail bitten to the quick. "Recruitment cycles," he muttered. "They thin their ranks on the other side. War needs bodies, bodies need souls. But look at this. Disqualifications." He said it like a little prayer. "Injury. Active service elsewhere. So I break my ankle," I said, "or I enlist here. Those are very different. Both work." He swallowed, and the swallow caught. "I'm late. Yesterday was my day." He turned and showed me the table. He'd assembled a horror show. Bolt cutters, a drill, duct tape and rags, a heavy hammer that had known windshields. He ran his fingers along them like he was checking a choir. "No," I said on instinct. "Yes," he said, jaw steel. "You're late too, you just don't know it. And I need someone I found myself. Not a friend, not family, no one they can punish in my brain." I picked up the bolt cutters. They were cold in my hands, heavier than I'd imagine a word like bolt cutter should be. "I can't," I said, and meant it in 3 directions at once. "I can't hurt you. I can't go where this goes. I can't believe this is the solution to any problem." He rolled up his left pant leg. There were old scars on his shin, white like chalk lines. "It's okay," he said, and for a second he was kind. "I've thought it through. Shatter it above the ankle. If the bone breaks wrong, they can't." A wind moved through the room. Not a breeze. Something like a breath drawn by a behemoth being surprised. The papers on the table lifted. The dust went sideways. The air got cold so fast my teeth hurt. It smelled like wet stone and copper pennies and the hiss you hear on a phone line when you're calling far away. They came out of the shade. 3 figures, tall, proportioned like us if you squinted, but their skin drank light. They made the corners of my eyes ache. Their edges glittered in a way my brain rejected, like they weren't edges but possibilities. Each of them wore a band on the right wrist, a ring of the same glyphs from my stamp. The bands moved a little like muscles flexing. Leroy stood straighter and then didn't. The bolt cutter slipped out of my hands, hit the floor hard enough to chime, and the sound went nowhere. I hid. Cowardice gets a bad rap. Sometimes it saves the story for later. From behind a crate, through slats, I watched. The figures didn't step so much as they unchose to be far away. They were near and then nearer with no between. One touched Leroy's shoulder and he keened, not in pain. In recognition, somehow, "Don't," he started, and whatever he said after that wasn't English or any sound we make when we mean to speak. It was like hearing a recording fast-forwarded and reversed while someone strangled a clarinet. They took him the way a magnet takes a nail out of a pile of sawdust. He glanced at me once, not to say help, to say look, to say learn. And then I was alone in that wreck of sun, my hands empty, my mouth full of the taste of old coins. I sat on the concrete until the squares of light moved and the sound of the highway came back to normal. My heartbeat flattened to something I could hide behind. I checked the table in a daze, like I was going to clean up, like hospitality demanded. I put the tools away before I went home. On the corner of the table lay a card. Not a business card or a photo. A card with lines printed on it and somebody's bad handwriting. Rules, it said at the top in a scrawl that took me back to detention slips in middle school. I read them twice. I read them again in the parking lot. Then once more in my car before I turned the key. Rule 1. Do not answer when they use your father's voice after midnight. Even once. Even to tell them to stop. Rule 2. Keep the token dry. If it gets wet, it remembers the flood and wants to go home. Rule 3. Carry salt in your left pocket. Change it every day. Rule 4. Make 2 copies of her name and hide one under your tongue. Rule 5. If you see words you wrote yesterday and they're different today, don't correct them. Do not rewrite what the house has learned. Rule 3 felt stupid then. Rule 3 felt like superstition. Rule 3 is the one that would save my life twice. Rule 2 I didn't understand yet, and then I did and wished I never had. On my monitor back at the dorm, my post-it note had curled at the edges. Make a scan of that weird letter. The adhesive dried in a yellow crust. The paper had picked up an oily thumbprint that wasn't mine. I stuck it to the letter itself, because what else do you do with a reminder that's done reminding? Let me be very clear about this next bit. I did something I'd sworn I would never do. I walked into a recruiting office and gave my name to a man whose smile had sharp edges. The Australian Army didn't care that my politics were a mess. It cared that my back was straight and my urine was clean and my dentist had not failed me. It cared that my fear of becoming property was less than my fear of being harvested by people with black wrists. The loophole saved me. Active service here meant no service there. The letter's own clause had presented me with a fork in a road I didn't want to be on, and I sprinted down the less haunted path. I won't pretend I transformed into a true believer, but there's something about getting up at dawn because you have to that makes the day feel like it belongs to you more honestly. My body softened in some places and hardened in others. I learned how to fold fabric so tight it could stand up on its own. I learned to make my bed a map. I learned to run through air that fought back and to carry what mattered and leave what didn't. I learned to be grateful when someone shared their water from a canteen you were both supposed to keep to yourselves. The first time I made a mistake that got someone's shins bruised, I apologized like I meant it and learned to mean it sooner the next time. On base at night, when you're too tired to think straight but too wired to sleep, you hear a lot of stories that should start with "it all started," but don't, because the kind of people who tell them don't need preambles. The worst ones were the ones that cut off mid-sentence. A guy would begin to say, "I used to dream of," and then decide that dreaming was the problem. I kept the token they'd sent me in a Ziploc bag inside a Tupperware inside my footlocker. Rule 2. Keep the thing dry. It looked like a subway medallion, dark and light at the same time, and when I held it a certain way, it seemed to sink into my skin. I told myself it was a placebo, a way to pretend I had control. We carry our own leashes and call them choices. I also kept salt in my left pocket because Rule 3 had that special sting of nonsense, and nonsense is how you know you've got superstition that works. Every morning, I folded a little paper envelope of salt the way my grandmother used to fold spice in a foil when we went camping. The first few days, the salt cut my hand and left little white marks on my thigh where it rubbed. Then I stopped noticing it. That's how ritual makes a home. Leroy's Rule 4 felt like a riddle. Make 2 copies of your name and hide one under your tongue. I wrote my name on 2 pieces of paper. I tucked one into my sock. The other I set on my tongue and tried to talk. Paper tastes like nothing and then like something that shouldn't be food. I kept it there for 60 seconds and felt like a child playing. I spat it out and the paper had gone soft and unreadable. I threw it away and felt immediately like I'd thrown away a small, important thing you only realize later you need, like the spare screw that fell out of the hinge. I made another and slipped it under the insole of my boot. That's not what the rules said, but it felt adjacent. I didn't answer my father's calls after midnight. He didn't call after midnight, in general. He gardened and watched bad crime dramas and fell asleep at 10 with the TV blue on his face. But for 2 nights in a row after basic, my phone hummed at 12:11 a.m., 12:12 a.m., 12:13 a.m., and the caller ID said Dad. The first night, I stared at it dry-eyed until it stopped. The second night, the screen lit up and I heard his voice in my head anyway. Hey, mate, you up? And I put the phone in the freezer because that's where you put things you can't throw away but need to be quiet. You adapt to the ugly things. You start doing them with care. The care matters. I served. I sweated in places with bad water and good music. I watched a kid from Perth cry into his sleeve and then laugh 5 minutes later so hard he choked. I wrote letters to people I barely knew because letters are better than silence. I watched a man crouch in a doorway and sketch a cat in his notebook so you could see the cat when he held the page in shadow. I did things I can't tell you because I can't tell myself. If you've been, you know. If you haven't, don't want to. The device that took me out was not personal. An IED doesn't care if you're kind. It doesn't care if you wanted to be a teacher or if you promised to call your sister more. We rolled, and the world turned, and my legs sent up a flare that said, "You are meat." The shock pushed all the air out of my lungs, and then took a second to think about it, and push more out just to be thorough. Hospital ceilings blur at the corners. The lights above your bed get teeth. You learn undertones in morphine. In the second week, I cried because a nurse put her hand on my forehead the way my mother did when I had fevers at 8. I cried because the nurse took her hand away to do her job. The bone healed the way bones do when you're lucky and unlucky at the same time. I walk with a hitch when I'm tired and climb stairs like a letter Z, and I can't run for a bus if the bus is indifferent about me. The discharge papers came in a manila envelope with a brutal stamp. No glyphs, just a normal kind of official scar. Honorable, it said. The word felt too fancy. I felt like an apple someone had already taken a bite out of and then put back in the bowl. You'd think that would be the end. Serve here. Slip their net. Grow old, maybe slower, but in the sun, you know. 2 months after I got home, my mailbox coughed up another envelope with the same too cold stamp. Same circle of knives. Same smell that made the space behind my teeth ache. Greetings, Mr. Allen, it said, as if we were still polite. In light of your recent change in status from active service, you are hereby notified. The words flipped my stomach. I felt my face go cold and my hands go hot. I sent an appeal. I wrote about my leg in bureaucrat. I included doctor's notes you could smell the waiting room on. I begged without using the word. Their reply came fast enough to feel pre-written. Appeal denied. The phrase looked like it had been printed on me, not the paper. My eyes snagged the clause I had missed or refused to read the first time. It sat right there, like a snake you keep stepping over because you convince yourself it was a rope. Persons due to report may be disqualified from service due to inhibiting injury or active service in a separate military. And then, in a smaller font, the killer. Note, injuries must be demonstrably soul-inhibiting. I stood in my kitchen holding the paper and felt cleverness drain out of me like bathwater. I thought of Leroy's table. I thought of him asking me to break bone because he didn't have a better word. My leg had bled. It wasn't enough. They didn't want my limp. They wanted my light. I put the kettle on because that's what I do when the brain is burning. The kettle shrieked and I didn't hear it first. When I did, the scream fit the day. I poured the water and the steam carried a smell up to my face that didn't belong to tea. Flood water, cold iron, rain in a train station with a broken roof. I reached for the token to check it, just to make sure it was dry, to laugh at myself for being the sort of person who checks. My hand stopped. I hadn't put the token away since discharge. The Tupperware was empty. My footlocker was clean. My heart threw itself against the bars. I tore through drawers like a robber. I emptied pockets and turned cushions and felt inside shoes like the token had learned to hide. In the back of the pantry, behind the rice and a jar of chickpeas, I found a small wet ring on the shelf like someone had set a glass there and lifted it while it was still sweating. My jaw clicked. My brain supplied a ridiculous image. The token had gone for a drink. Rule 2, keep it dry. If it gets wet, it remembers the flood and wants to go home. I remembered the kettle steam, and then I remembered the first letter's map. The map had been a joke when I first saw it. Lines that made no earthly sense, a spiral that labeled north as northish, a station that wasn't on any line I knew. The token was gone. The rules vibrated in my pocket where salt rubbed my thigh. The house went quiet around me like a dog listening for thunder before it knows it's thunder. That night, I dreamed my father called me from the backyard. My old backyard, where the lemon tree leaned and the grass always had patches like a bad haircut. "Hugo," he said. He almost got me. The voice was right, but the cadence was wrong by half a heartbeat, like a drummer who's trying to be human. I put the phone in the freezer again when I woke up. I stood there with my hands on the cold shelf and laughed once hard. "I'm not even hungry," I told the empty kitchen. "That's why this is funny." The next day, I drove to the river the way you drive to a dentist appointment you can't not go to. There's a pedestrian bridge that hums when too many people are on it. The steel cables sing. The river below looked exactly like a thing that would keep secrets. I walked to the middle and leaned on the rail and thought, I don't have the token. They can't take me yet. And then I thought, they can take me whenever they want. The token is just a courtesy. The rules are a kindness, which is worse than a cruelty because it lets you hope. A woman pushed a pram past me, and the baby looked at me like he knew a joke I didn't. His eyes were new but old around the edges. I stepped back, gave them space, and touched my left pocket. Salt. I still carry it. I still change it every morning. Every once in a while, I dump the salt out in the sink, and the grains look like a field of wrecked names. I started making lists. That's what I do when fear wants to be chaos. If I made a list, terror had to sit down and spell itself correctly. To do before reporting, if reporting is real. Write to Mom. Not too much detail. Just love. Hide spare key outside somewhere weird so they don't find it when they come. Pack something stupid like a rock to prove to myself that touching dirt matters. Find someone who knows more rules. I still had Leroy's card. The corners had gone soft with pocket life. I turned it over, hoping for a second page, a secret. On the back, faint, I'd never noticed a stain before, like it had soaked something up. I held it against the window and saw the ghost of another script behind the paper. The glyphs from the stamp, but they were bending like reeds in water, and then I couldn't see them anymore because my eyes watered. The paper smelled like dust shaken out of heavy curtains in a house no one lived in. On my desk, the post-it note that said make a scan of that weird letter had picked up more writing somehow. I hadn't added it. In smaller letters, lower right, a time, 2:37. I didn't own a pen that made a line that thin. I peeled the note off and another layer came with it, like the paper was molting. Beneath it, under the adhesive, the wood of the desk bore shallow scratches I hadn't noticed before, arranged very neatly in a circle inside a circle, like the stamp on the envelope. I put my finger on the scratches, and the little hairs on my arm pricked like they'd been rubbed the wrong way. Rule 5. If you see words you wrote yesterday and they're different today, don't correct them. Do not rewrite what the house has learned. I hated Rule 5 the most. It asked me to be complicit with the ghost in the machine. I went to the Army counselor's office to talk about post-service stuff because that's allowed and because I needed to be in a room with a person who believed in paperwork. The counselor, a square man with low eyelids and a tie that had small airplanes on it, listened to me talk around a thing I couldn't name. When I paused, he said, "Transitions are tricky." He slid a pamphlet across the desk titled Reintegration, Finding Your New Normal. He underlined a phone number and said, "Call anytime." I didn't, because the calls come after midnight and I don't answer those. On my way out, a woman in a nurse's uniform said my name like she wasn't sure it was mine. "Mr. Allen?" I turned and she smiled with too many teeth at the front. "You left this," she said, and handed me a plastic bag with a heavy disc in it. The token, dry sealed, coiled like a sleeping thing. "I didn't leave this," I said. I knew exactly where I hadn't left it. "It was at the desk," she said, unbothered by the physics. "Mr. Allen, you dropped this while signing." I didn't sign. I started and then saw the clipboard near the door with my name scrawled on a line I didn't remember writing. My name, but wrong. The H flatter, the G leaning too far back like it had a bad back. Rule 5. Do not rewrite what the house has learned. The room felt colder on the left side than the right, like the air was being pulled. I took the bag. The token nestled against the plastic like a beetle. Rule 2 ticked in my head like a metronome. Back home, I set the token on the table and stared at it like two men in a dusty western stare at a gun on the ground. The clock on the microwave said 2:12 p.m. I don't know why that mattered. The token looked heavier now, and when I lifted it, it hummed just enough to argue with the bones in my hand. "Okay," I said aloud, because you have to talk to something, even if it's just to tell your voice it still has a job. "Okay, 2 months. I lived like a person waiting to be called to the principal's office. I cleaned too much. I ate standing up. I tried a date and blew it by being honest. It's not you, it's the occult draft, is not a line that keeps a conversation going. You become a liar to save someone from a truth they can't use. That's what a haunting is half the time. There were days when I forgot for half an hour. The forgetting was the worst. The remembering punched harder then. I started experimenting with the rules because that's what idiots do right before they die in stories like this. I put salt in my right pocket for a day and had the worst luck all afternoon. Cashiers shorted me coins by accident. A dog I'd never met growled low when I walked past. My phone buzzed with no notifications, and the screen showed a reflection of my face like I was underwater. I moved the salt back. The day clicked into a different gear. Coincidence. I don't believe in coincidence anymore. I believe in complicated systems pretending to be coincidence because they're shy. I kept writing my name and hiding it under my tongue. For real this time, not the kid version I'd done before. I learned that if you fold the paper small and think the letters instead of saying them, your tongue will cradle it and you can talk around a little. It dissolved faster when I was scared. I could feel the paper bleed into the glands under my jaw the way sugar hits blood. I don't know if it did anything. I know I felt less like a target and more like someone who had put on a second shirt. At exactly 2:37 a.m., 3 nights in a row, the post-it note on my monitor gave a little cheep. Not a sticky note sound, a bird sound. The third night, I peeled it off without looking and stuck it to the underside of my desk and went back to bed. At 2:37 a.m. the fourth night, something tapped the window softly 3 times. Rule 1 saved me. My father's voice said, "Hugo," through the glass, like fog knows your name. 2 weeks before my report date, the toaster caught on fire. Not a big fire, just enough to dance and demand attention. I unplugged it, and smothered it with a towel while cursing the way a man curses small tragedies to keep the larger ones out. When I shook the towel out in the sink, a tiny curl of black metal fell onto the plate with a ping. I stared at it and felt my neck go stiff. It was one of the glyphs from the stamp, melted out of shape I didn't want to find. I threw it into the bin, and the bin sounded deep for a second, bottomless. I took the bin down to the building's big trash can and dumped it like I was burying something bad. On my way back up the stairs, I passed my neighbor's kid. He sat on the step with a plastic dinosaur and an expression that said he'd seen a lot of cartoons and none of them prepared him for downstairs. "You have to keep the salt in your left pocket," he said without looking up. I sat down on the step next to him because I couldn't stand for a second. "Who told you that?" I asked. He moved the dinosaur's tail and didn't answer. The plastic made a hollow sound against the concrete, like knocking on a tooth. The day came closer like a tide. I could pretend not to see if I never looked at the moon. So I looked at the moon. I looked at maps. I looked at the back of my hand, at veins I couldn't name, at scars I could. I try not to count. The night before I was due to report like it was normal. I packed a bag, even though everything I'd heard said bringing anything didn't matter, that you don't bring things to where your soul gets tallied. Still, I put in a t-shirt that smelled like detergent in the river. I put in a photo of my mother that was really a photo of her hands holding a mixing bowl. I put in salt. I put in the card with the rules and the post-it that had learned to talk. I tucked the token into a dry sock and put the sock into a dry shoe and put the shoe in the bag. I slept on the floor next to the bag like a man guarding a wall. I woke up at 4:02 a.m., heart punching, the kind of waking where your brain gets there before your body and yells at it to move. The apartment smelled wrong, a little sweet like a florist shop after a funeral. The lights in the hallway flickered just once and never again. I stood up, my leg complaining, and laughed once because it felt good to make any sound that wasn't fear. "Okay," I said, "I'm coming." The map was folded in my pocket like a trick you show yourself. The token in its sock was a heartbeat you can hold. The induction station on the map wasn't at a place with a name I can put in your mouth. The shape of the directions felt like a place you'd only find if you'd been there before. I took a bus and then a tram, and then I walked along a fence topped with loops of wire that had the tired shine of old blade. A dog barked 3 times on-off on like a switch. A man in a reflective vest watched me walk by and looked at me the way crows look at rings. The station looked, for a second, like an underpass. Then it looked like the mouth of a quarry. Then it looked like a closed shop. The token in my pocket got heavy in a kind of way physics doesn't account for, and the world folded its edges down around a hole I swear wasn't there 5 blinks ago. The air was colder than it should have been for dawn. It was the kind of cold that isn't air temperature, it's an attitude. I tasted iron. I heard water, but far down like a well reports on the rain differently than the ground does. The rules sat up in my mind like dogs hearing the front gate open. I stepped forward and the ground under my foot made a small choice to be elsewhere. The light around me did the same thing. I have no poetry for what it felt like, because poetry has to share grammar with the real. This was a laugh without a mouth that told me I had misunderstood love my whole life. This was falling in a direction that doesn't have a word, followed by standing on something that was trying to convince me it was solid. I looked up and the sky was a wound. I looked down and the ground was a book. My breath reached out and didn't come back exactly right. They were already there. Not the black wrist figures from the warehouse. Not those exactly. These wore shapes that apologized for being almost right. One had eyes like polished coal under ice. One had a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to stop smiling. They didn't speak out loud at first. They let me take in the machines. I call them machines because that's what they resembled if you were trying to be kind to your brain. There were tables and cages and wheels and long bands that could be belts or rivers. They were built of something that took light apart and put it back together wrong. The smell was ocean and hot copper and whatever blood smells like when it can think. "Mr. Allen," one of them said, and it sounded like a voice coming down a hallway where all the doors are slightly open. "Welcome. Please present your token." I pulled it from the sock in the shoe and held it out and almost said, "It's dry," because I'm an idiot who talks to rules like they're people. The figure took it, and the glyphs on his wrist moved like they were breathing harder now. I filed an appeal, I said, because habits survive even the after lobby of hell. "I have a leg." "It's—" "We saw." The other said, its smile flattening by kind increments until it was a line as thin as a ruler. "You will not need that here." It gestured in a way that meant everything without pointing at anything. "You fight with," I started. "Not that," it said, and tapped my sternum with a knuckle that didn't have bone in it. "Not the way ours do." The touch went through me like a note held too long on a piano string. The machines hummed. A door opened in the air and warm breath came out of it. I heard, faint, a sound I will never render accurately. The noise souls make when they're being counted. It was like numbers singing and like foxes barking and like the last song you heard in a bar at 1:45 a.m. that made you cry. It made my eyes sting with the sting you get when you almost remember something from when you were very small. They handed me a card, not like Leroy's card, an official card printed with the disclosure shapes we like to pretend mean consent. Operational notes, it said at the top. I held it like a person grips a rope on a boat they're not sure is tied to anything, and read, because not reading has never saved me. Do not look through the musterer's eyes during catalog. They are mirrors facing mirrors. Do not carry images of your lovers in easily dissolving media. Ink directs. Graphite disperses. Do not share water before gates. The water remembers, and it will choose. The bench that feels the kindest is often the wrong bench. The arm that you think is yours if it comes off is not yours. Do not chase it. Rule 4, about the bench, felt like a joke. Deceptively safe. No one goes to war to sit on the right bench. But when my legs shook and my breath stuttered and I had to choose between a slab that looked warmed by kind hands and a slab that looked like it resented me, I understood. A figure I'll call the dispatcher because my human mouth needs noun said, "We are in a hurry." The voice buzzed in my teeth. "Many of you will not be long. Some of you will be a very long time." Both are true. I followed a line of bodies. Not bodies. People like me wearing bodies like costumes that didn't fit quite right anymore. Some had their eyes closed like they were pretending to be elsewhere and doing a good job. Some had their mouths open like they were letting something out or were trying to catch something. We moved past a window that showed nothing, and then something, and then me, but wrong, with my hair shorter and my face 15 years tired and a new scar on my jaw. I licked my jaw like looking at it would make it happen and tasted salt. Rule 3, left pocket. The post-it note from my monitor was in my bag, and I don't know how to tell you this without sounding like a fool. It warmed. It warmed like a small animal is a little furnace when it trusts you. I put my hand in, and the paper thumped once in my palm like a sparrow. I left it there because I didn't know where else to put my faith. They put a band on my right wrist, and it moved like it owned the wrist and was just being polite by letting me keep it. The glyphs adjusted themselves around my hair and my skin the way a smart bracelet learns your pulse. I felt myself get inventoried. I felt the part of me that makes jokes step aside and let the archive do its work. Behind the table with the bands, on a shelf, I saw something dumb that broke me open a little. A post-it pad. Yellow. Ordinary. Stolen from an office somewhere like mine, somewhere like yours. The top page was crumpled in the corner, the way they get when you stick them to a surface that isn't excited to be stuck to. I stared at it so hard the figure behind the table followed my eyes and then looked back at me and smiled with too many teeth. "We take what works," he said. His voice had probably never been human and had learned how to be friendly recently. They sat us. The benches looked like hospital beds designed by wolves. I chose the one that looked like it wanted me dead because the gentle one looked like candy with a needle in it. The woman next to me turned her head and her face had the streaked look of someone who'd cried and couldn't finish. "First time?" she murmured. "Yeah," I said. She nodded like she approved. "Don't let them number you in your own words," she said. "Keep a word back." She shut her eyes in a way that looked like opening, and the bench made a little happy sound under her bones. Wrong bench. I thought about her. Maybe she knew something I didn't. Alan, Hugo, the dispatcher said, but in 3 voices at once. The voice the post office clerk used when he got serious, the voice my father used when he was disappointed, the voice of someone I loved whom I hadn't met yet. I stood because my name pulled me up. I lay down because the bench wanted me to, and because if you fight a thing too early, you waste a fight. The band on my wrist tightened like a cat's tail around a hand. They lowered a net of nothing over my face, and I smelled rain before it hits, and paper before it tears. For all my talk about hating war, I didn't expect the first thing I felt to be relief. The bench was cold but honest. The room made a noise like a huge lung exhaling. The world outside the bench went away, and another world climbed up into the bed with me, careful not to crush. My soul, the word felt dumb when I used it before, like a cliche in a bad song, stood up inside me and looked around and said, finally, I'm going to tell you what they do. I'm going to tell you because if I keep it inside, I'll pop. And if I lie about it, I'll be alone in a way that knows how to wait. They don't tear. They unweave. They don't burn. They reassign heat. They take the parts of you that think they are separate and ask them to do the same job. The part of me that loved the smell of early morning gum trees got welded to the part of me that hates the way fluorescent lights sound. The scene made a noise like lightning far away and stayed quiet. The part of me that forgives too slow got put next to the part of me that learns names too fast, and they made a new room together. It hurt, not like a cut, like a birth. A figure leaned into my field of view with eyes like kettles. Look here, it said, kind. Rule in my head. Do not look through the muster's eyes. I angled my gaze at its cheek and saw the space there scald and cool. Good, it murmured, and withdrew just enough to make my breath stop catching. You've been advised. They asked me questions without asking. The answers came out like humming. They wanted to know how I define home. They wanted to know the color of my shame. They wanted to know what I think happens to love when it goes into hiding. They put the answers on shelves somewhere I could almost see and labeled them in a language I'll spend the rest of my life almost knowing. Someone in a near bed screamed and didn't make human sounds for a while. Then they made human sounds again and laughed a little. Oh, they said like it was a town they'd visited and forgotten was nice in summer. I thought of Leroy, the way he looked back at me. I wondered how many beds away he'd been when he realized there was no running with your feet here, only with the parts of you that go to sleep when you're tired of being brave. They let me sit up when the band stopped moving. The room looked bigger. Rooms look bigger when your eyes learn a new distance. The dispatcher nodded to me in a way that made me feel like we were equal for a second and then took it away. Next phase, it said. Orientation. I stood and my bad leg didn't matter because bad and good legs don't have the same margins in this place, and followed a river of people who walked like they had carried heavy things and were finally being allowed to put them down. I kept my left hand on my salt and felt it don't laugh purr. We entered a hall that knew how to be a hall in 15 different ways. The walls were smooth and then porous and then made of stacked books and then made of an unfocused light like the inside of your eyelids on a blue day. On one long table stood things that wanted names. Helmets that weren't helmets. Weapons that weren't weapons. Objects that looked like the letters I hadn't learned yet. A woman, human, or close enough to be a relief, stood behind the table with a sheaf of papers and a mouth like a blade she kept sheathed with effort. I'm nurse, she said. I think I was a title, not a name. Don't thank me later. You won't want to. I like her immediately. She slid me a stack. Your assignments are recursive. If you don't like them, you can go file a complaint in the lake. I looked down at the paper and saw my handwriting already there. Hugel Annen. The date in a format we don't use. The word infantry then crossed out, and beneath it, in a hand that might have been mine if mine drank black ink for breakfast, intercessor. The word made my teeth hurt like chewing foil. In the margins, someone had doodled a little circle of knives, the stamp image. The doodle wasn't an image though. The lines moved a little, slow, like a heartbeat you can only see if you stare. I didn't, I started. You did, nurse said. You just weren't there when you did it. Save your questions for when they'll make a difference. She slid over a small pouch. For your left pocket, she said without looking at me. And this. She pushed a small bottle of water toward me. Don't share it. Her eyes flicked to a figure across the room, one with a smile that had gotten wider since we arrived. Especially not with them. Rule: do not share water before gates. The water remembers. The water chooses. A bell rang without sound. The room moved like seagrass. The band on my wrist tightened briefly, a reminder that I was on a leash that would be polite until it wasn't. They made us line up near a gate that wasn't a gate. It was an absence in the shape of a door. A musterer with eyes like polished coal walked along the line and laid a hand on each of our heads like a blessing or a weight. When he got to me, he paused. The air around his wrist stuttered. "You brought a word with you," he said softly. "Yes," I said before my mouth consulted my brain. "Don't lose it," he said. "They make you fight naked if you do." "Who's they?" I asked, and he made the sort of smile you make when a child tries to wrestle you. "You'll see," he said. The post-it in my bag thumped again. I took it out and looked at it, and the word on it had changed. It used to say, "Make a scan of that weird letter." Now it said, "Don't take the kind bench." I smiled without meaning to and slid the note back where it had warmed a space for itself. We walked through the gate into a place that smelled like old churches and sparking transformers and the undersides of bridges. The ground here shifted under my feet like a crowd learning a dance. I kept my salt. I kept my word. I kept my head down when Eyes asked me to look. We came to a pool. Lake was the wrong word. It was contained the way a mouth contains a tongue. The water looked thick, like it had thoughts it wasn't sharing. The surface reflected us only if we stood still and weren't thinking. The minute we thought of anything loud, the reflection showed something else. A bed I'd slept in at 17. A woman I loved who laughed with her mouth open. My father, younger than me, running, laughing at someone who would be me much later. "We don't swim," Nurse said. "We listen." She pointed to a ledge. "Sit. Feet in, if you want to remember how to cry." No one moved. She sighed, the sound of wind through wires. "Everyone with a name begins with a wound," she said, and that was either poetry or policy. We sat. I put my feet in, and the cold bit me in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. It bit me at the spot behind my knees where your body stores certain kinds of sorrow. I saw the stairwell where my neighbor's kid had told me about left pockets. I saw my kitchen sink layered with salt that had clumped. I saw the post office clerk's face when he told me the letter was legitimate and realized he'd gotten one once. Maybe he'd gone. Maybe he'd stayed. Either way, he'd had to stop making jokes about stamps. The lake said a word, not out loud, inside my mouth. It said Hugo, but not like my father. It said like an old friend who's practiced for a long time how to be gentle when delivering bad news. I know. I told the water and sounded unhinged and didn't care. They briefed us without telling us it was a briefing. The musterer with the kettle eyes walked along the bank and told a story about a city that wasn't a city, where walls were built of the arguments couples never finished and streets were made of the excuses people tell when they don't bring their whole self to work. He said, "The enemy eats fear the way a vine eats brick. We aren't here to kill them. We're here to unplug the wall sockets they use." He wrote nothing down, and I learned more than I had during any class where my professor ran through slides. He said, "Your body is collateral. Your mind is an instrument. Your soul is both currency in the bank. Mind that." He handed me something small. "For later," he said. I looked. A nail. Silver, maybe. Old. Bent the way nails get bent when someone who doesn't hammer often tries to do it fast. "You'll know when," he said, and for once in this place, I believed someone when they said that. When they sent us to bunks, I chose the one that looked like it would pinch my hips. I didn't take the kind bench. On the pillow lay a small pair of earplugs. Foam. Orange. Office issue. I rolled them between finger and thumb the way you do, and they got small and then fat again. I put them on the shelf. I wanted to hear what I came to hear. Night falls differently there. It arrives like an email with a subject line that makes your stomach drop. The half-light before bed got into my bones. My bunkmate, the woman from earlier, whispered, "You'll do fine," and I wanted to believe her badly enough to pretend I did. She put her hands on the blanket, and I noticed she didn't wear a band on her right wrist anymore. "It fell off," she said, seeing me see. "A step in the lake. It chose." She smiled tired. "Don't do that," she added, "unless you mean to change in a way you cannot unchange." I lay on my side with my hand on my left pocket. The salt was warm. The post-it note made a little sigh. My mouth tasted like the paper with my name had dissolved in a place that wasn't my mouth. Somewhere in the building, someone sang a song I knew the tune to but not the words. We dreamed there like the dreams went on strike and came back with a contract. My dream that night was a corridor full of doors, and each door had a pair of eyes at the keyhole, looking in. Not mine, yours. The eyes looked kind. That was the worst part. I didn't open a door. I walked the hall until the carpet wore a path under my feet and the walls sweat and I could taste metal. When I woke, I knew two things. I was going to have to learn fast, and I was going to have to let go of being good at being kind when kindness is the wrong tool. Morning is funny without sun. They ring a bell that sounds like a marble dropped into a bucket in another town. We lined up. The band on my wrist had adjusted again while I slept. It fit better. It hums when I think certain thoughts, fight, hide, love, and the hum changes pitch like a tuning fork. Nurse handed me a cup. "Drink," she said. "Water cold. Do not spill," she added. I didn't. The cup weighed the same as 3 secrets. The dispatcher looked at us the way a coach looks at a team that's either going to win or learn something about losing. "You will go out," he said. "You will meet a pocket of enemy. You will likely not understand what they're doing for some time. You will trust the rules more than you trust your instincts. You will return if you return. The map is inside your band." He tapped his own wrist with a knuckle, and the air made a small noise like a finger plucking an elastic. I looked down at my wrist and saw, faint between glyphs, a pattern that looked like a street grid if streets were veins. It pointed me toward a place that hurt to say, not because of the word, because of the feeling it put in my teeth. I knew it as surely as you know your way to the bathroom in the dark. I pressed my tongue against the roof of my mouth and felt paper that wasn't there. We walked out through a door that was a mirror for a second and then a mouth. The ground beyond bit my boot heel like a dog with opinions. We descended a ramp that had more steps than it had steps, the way long goodbyes do. At the threshold, a musterer said, "One more thing," as if he'd remembered his grocery list. "If anyone offers to take your pain in exchange for a story, say no." We nodded like we wouldn't make that mistake. We are exactly the people who make that mistake. The air outside tasted like someone had been welding nearby. The field, if I call it a field, you'll understand shape, not content, rolled away in a series of wrong hills. On the nearest one, a structure that could have been a house or a trap or a house that was proud of being a trap. "Intercessors," Nurse said, clapping once. "That's you." She pointed at me and 8 others. Our bands thrummed. The string of a low instrument plucked firmly. "Go." We went. I will tell you what was inside that house that wasn't when we opened it. I'll tell you what the salt did, and why the deceptively safe rule kept me from sitting down where it was warm and giving up in a way that would have felt like a nap. I'll tell you how the token, dry as I could keep it, still remembered the flood. I'll tell you when the nail mattered. I'll tell you how I learned what a soul considers an injury and what the invoice looks like when it's sent. But not yet. We fanned around the house that wasn't like we'd trained for it, even though training meant nothing here. The facade couldn't decide what it wanted to be, weatherboard, concrete, skin, and kept breathing through its windows like a runner who'd stopped too fast. My band hummed a low note, and I felt in my molars. "On me," Nurse said, but she didn't move first. She wanted to see if we were the type to wait for orders. I stepped. The threshold smelled like burned sugar and damp wool. I put my hand on the jamb, and it was warm in a way that wasn't temperature. It was a tension. Inside, the foyer was 3 inches too narrow for comfort. then 2 inches too wide for safety. The floorboards flexed with each footfall like they were honest and hated themselves for it. On the left, a door hung half open, and behind it something made a soft sound like paper being crumpled slowly and uncrumpled slower. "Intercessor," nurse said, her voice that clipped kindness. "You get first pull. Watch the floor. It will lie to you about its angles." She lifted her chin at me, and I went left. The room had furniture, if you define furniture as places where admission costs something. A couch sat low, upholstered in a pattern that moved when you didn't look at it. The kind bench. My legs buzzed with the tired of a life I didn't get to keep and wanted to sit. The Post-it in my bag warmed like a warning candle, and my left pocket salt pressed a line into my thigh. "Don't take the kind bench." I stood. On the couch, a figure slouched that looked like me in the way a mirror looks like you when you haven't slept for 2 days and have been telling everyone you're fine. His face angled toward the ceiling, mouth open to catch something that the ceiling was feeding him in slow drops. The drops were not water. They were little hisses. Each drop hit his tongue, and a memory fizzed and went out. I knew because the room made me know. The way he tied his shoes with a shake at the end, the exact feel of the silverware drawer handle when he was 7. The laugh he did when the joke was mean to him, but he wanted to show he was on the team. Gone with each hiss. He wasn't fighting. He was relieved. That was the worst part. He'd been heavy for years, and he was finally setting the bags down. "Don't sit," nurse snapped behind me, as if I needed reminding. He made his choice. He's numberless now. A man I hadn't learned yet, broad nose, wide mouth, eyes like someone who decided a long time ago not to blink unless absolutely necessary. Took a half step toward the couch. His band thrummed a warning. He froze like his ribs had become shelf brackets. A door at the back of the room opened by itself in that embarrassing way automatic doors have when you weren't ready. Beyond it, a narrow stairwell fell away. The walls furred with some damp felt that wanted to be touched. "Kitchen," nurse said. "The first breach lives where people pretend to clean." She looked at me again. She had a way of picking and making it seem like you'd volunteered. I went down. The steps counted me in a language I didn't speak, but felt like being counted at customs. The bottom smelt like lemon and rot. Kitchen, yes. Counter, yes. Sink, yes. On the ceiling above the stove, a patch of stain that pulsed like a tide chart. I put my hand in my left pocket and felt the paper envelope of salt. Rule 3 whispered the way my grandmother whispered when she stole me cookies from the jar while telling me not to take cookies from a jar. I tore the envelope and let a line of grains fall around the stove in a careful loop. The band on my wrist sang one clear note, and the patch on the ceiling recoiled the way a mouth does when you put something sour in it. From the stain, a voice unrolled. Not a voice, a compilation. My father, saying my name with a question mark. Leroy, breathless, saying you're late. Nurse, saying don't thank me. The post office clerk, saying go. All laced into a homily from someone who'd never been a person. Share your water, it said. The kitchen is dry. Share your water and we'll be kin. T, the wide-mouthed man, stepped into the loop with me. He had the assignment look, the one you get when someone in the world you were born and gave you a task so many times that the shape stuck. He popped the lid of his canteen. Don't, I said, but not fast enough. He tipped a mouthful into his hand, and the water didn't hit his palm. It hung in the air and considered him. Then it leapt up, ecstatic, into the stain. The stain drank like a person who'd been waiting to tell you how thirsty they were. The band on T's wrist tightened, and the glyphs around it moved like they remembered a dance from school. Nurse's hand hit T's shoulder and squeezed hard enough to make his eyes water. Rule, she said, in a way that made him look like someone whose mother has just used his middle name. You do not share water before gates. Yours is yours. The water remembers. She pushed his canteen back into his chest. It will bring you where it got you. T swallowed and nodded. Overhead, the stain in the ceiling closed its mouth, sated for the moment, but now it knew his name like water knows the shape of a cup. We moved on. The hallway was the kind that makes you lose time. It had 3 doors and 20. Each handle wanted to be grabbed in a different way. Palm, fingertips, teeth. "Don't bite anything here," nurse said, just to make it clear that the house was clever enough to try. My salt line had made a small, clean ring in the grime on my fingers. The smell of the place changed when we turned right. Burnt hair, wet wool, lemon gone sour. The band on my wrist pulsed. The air ahead chopped like there was a fan somewhere we couldn't see. We found them in the dining room. The enemy. I'd expected shapes. Monsters. Bad sketches. These were not shapes. These were absences trying on shapes like jackets and finding a fit somewhere around the shoulders. They wore faces the way mannequins wear faces. Their eyes were too deep and their mouths were rehearsing. They weren't looking at us. They were looking past us like we were mirrors and they were checking the fit. "Do not look through their eyes," nurse said, soft. "Look at their throats. Souls sit shallow here." The nearest one tilted its head at me. "Hugo," it said, and not like my father. Like a teacher learning names and enjoying the power of it. "Trade? Your pain, our story." Its hand came up, a hand like anyone's, and opened, palm up. "An offer. If anyone offers to take your pain in exchange for a story, say no." The muster at the gate had said, like he was telling us not to get into cars with strangers. The part of me that keeps score piped up. How much easier would it be if the ache in my leg went away? If the shame of the warehouse, the horror of seeing Leroy taken, the brittle part that always wants to tell the room a joke to make it love me? What if that went quiet? The part of me that knows I lie when I say I don't want relief reach for the hand. I dug my fingernails into my left thigh. Salt scratched back. The post-it in my bag flared heat. Rule 3. Rule 5. Don't rewrite. I shook my head. "No," I said, in a voice I didn't like because it made me sound good. "My pain stays." Something behind the enemy's eyes flickered. It wasn't disappointment. It was a recalibration, like a machine that adjusts to the weight of the thing it needs to measure. "Then offer yours," it said. It meant, "Hurt them and we'll go." "No," I said again, and tasted paper on my tongue like I'd swallowed a piece of my name without meaning to. It lunged. The lunge wasn't a movement across space. It was a choice to be where my breath ended. T pushed me, and the choice missed. Nurse put a hand out, and the air folded like origami around the creature's wrist and pinned it to something I couldn't see. "Make it remember," she snapped. "Now." The nail. My hand knew before my head did. I palmed it, and it felt colder than my palm could negotiate. I slammed it down, hard, not into the thing's wrist because there was nothing there to hold, but into the shadow it cast. Shadows here have weight if you decide they do. The nail went through the shadow the way a promise goes through a stupid hope. The enemy made a sound like a bagpipe breaking. The shadow pinned, the wrist pinned. It looked at me, and its eyes weren't eyes anymore. For a second, they were rain at night, headlights making a mesh. "Salt," nurse said, and I poured my left pocket in a line across the thing's throat. The grains hit nothing and then hit something and stayed. The enemy's mouth stopped rehearsing and started to open for real, and the sound it would have made didn't arrive because the salt didn't let it. "It's remembering now," nurse said, and there was admiration in her voice I hadn't heard yet. "Good. How long?" I asked, not looking away because I knew if I looked anywhere else I'd throw up. "Long enough," she said. "Move." We moved. Another one tried to get smart and came at T from behind with a handful of someone else's hair. T flinched and his canteen knocked against the edge of the table. A drop of water fell, hung not falling, and spun once like it was making a decision. It leapt into the enemy's hand instead of the stain. The hand shuddered, then slowed like a muscle in cramp. T started. The water remembered him, but it had chosen wrong for once. His eyes got wet. He grinned without meaning it. "Thank you," he said to the water. It sank into the enemy's skin and didn't come back. We made the foyer again, and the couch was empty except for a single white hair that lay across the cushion like a sentence. I wanted to pick it up because it felt like litter, and didn't because I suddenly knew what happens if you take things from here that want to be left behind. The door spat us into the day, and the light felt like a hand on my face. Outside didn't forgive. It never does. But the air moved like it had decided not to bite. We brought back shapes of people who had been trussed up in the house and forgotten there. A woman with no eyebrows who clutched her own shoulders like she'd been walking without her skin. A boy maybe 18 who held the air with both hands like he was afraid it would go away. A man whose band had sunk into his wrist and was glowing like a coal. We loaded them onto stretchers that changed shape to the need, and the stretchers hummed with that lullaby note rooms make when someone marks safe on the inside of a door. Back in the hall that was a hall really, the band on my wrist released. It left a faint dark ring like when I used to wear rubber bands to remember things and forgot to move them. Nurse looked at me like she didn't want to admit she was impressed. "You didn't sit on the kind bench," she said. "The note told me not to," I said, because lying to her would be like lying to a scale. "What note?" she asked, and when I showed her the post-it, she took it like it might bite and held it up to the weird light. The paper radiated a small heat that didn't belong to heat. "We take what works," she said again, the way the band table figure had said. "Sometimes it takes us." She handed it back, and her fingers shook, and she tried to hide it, and then didn't try. We debriefed without debriefing, the way people do when they've watched something horrible and survived it by accident. T sat on a bench that looked like a bench and not like a trap, and put his head in his hands and laughed like a diver coming up. "Did you see the part where the water liked me?" he asked, too loud. "Did you see?" "It won't again," Nurse said, not unkind. "It's chosen. Once is kindness, twice is debt." She had us line up for catalog again, and I almost took the bench that looked like it had been warmed for me by someone who wanted me to be comfortable. The post-it in my bag kicked like a small animal in a nightmare. I moved one seat to the right. The person who took the kind bench made a little sound of gratitude and then slumped, eyes open, mouth open like a drain. The bench made a tiny, obscene swallowing sound. The band on his wrist tightened to the point of shining and then slackened, as if it were bored. Deceptively safe rule, not a joke. Some benches are for arrivals, Nurse said. Some are for departures. Measure twice, lie once. The musterer with the kettle eyes came to my head and tested me without touching. "Good," he said. "The shadow pins. You didn't chase your arm when it wasn't yours. You didn't look where we look and break your little hall of mirrors." He paused. "You kept a word." "What word is it?" I asked, because if you can't be brave, you can at least be curious. "It isn't a word we own," he said, and touched his temple. "You'll know when you need to say it, and you won't say it out loud." He leaned in a fraction. "You can leave. Afterwards," he whispered, as if the lake were listening, "if you keep yourself damaged in the right place." He meant soul injury. He meant this is a loophole like the other, and it's worse because you hurt the thing that makes you you, and then you don't get to be completely you again. He meant if you want out, you'll need to break the part that holds the light and the dark in a cup and hands it forward. He meant see what Leroy meant when he jammed his leg under the bolt cutters and hoped. The appeal denial letter line burned in my mind like a branding iron. Injuries must be soul inhibiting. I wanted to laugh until I coughed blood. Words make everything sound reasonable until you put your teeth on them. They fed us something that tasted like the underside of snow and left you feeling like you hadn't eaten but didn't need to. We had an hour. I sat on a step with my bag between my shoes and my left hand in my left pocket, rubbing salt into my skin like penance. T sat 2 steps down and pulled at his band as if he could stretch it. He looked back at me. "You should have let them take one story," he said, angry in that way hungry men get angry when somebody else turns down candy. "Just one. A tiny one. It wouldn't even be a good story." "What's a bad story?" I asked. "The one you tell yourself to be able to sleep," he said. He flinched at his own answer. "Shit, that was honest." He laughed and then didn't. "I keep thinking," he added lower, "what if I give them the part where I remember my brother's face when we crashed my dad's Uda and he thought we were going to lie about it, and then we didn't? What if I just hand that over? I could walk straighter." "You could," I said, "but you'd lose the thing that kept you honest when it was your turn to crash something." He looked at me, and the look said I'd hit something inside him with a stick. Also, I added, because I'm mean when I'm scared, they don't take the pain and leave you with the story. That's not how transactions work here. He craned his neck to look at the lake. The surface formed a little peak, like a listening ear. I took the Post-it out. It had learned a new trick. The letters crawled, slowly like vines on a time-lapse. Make a scan of that weird letter had been its first job. It had kept the cadence. Now it said, "Don't eat with your right hand." I snorted and put it back. When Nurse came around with bowls of snow under and the spoons were all left bent, I felt stupid for thinking the note was being fussy. Second deployment. The house this time was not a house. It was a playground. Swings moved without wind. The slide had teeth at the bottom, small, milk teeth like it would bite your thighs and say it was playing. The sandbox was damp and the sand had lines in it where someone had written with the side of a hand, and the writing had erased itself shyly. A seesaw sat with one end high, one end low, and a little black stain under the low end like oil. There were kids. Not kids. Parts of people that had chosen to be kid-shaped because kid shapes cut deep. They asked for names before they asked for help. "Tell us your names," they said, small voices, and the part of me that loves children stepped forward with open palms. "Keep a word," the muster had said. "2 copies of your name, one under your tongue. Rule 4. My mouth filled with saliva. I folded the paper small with my tongue. My breath took on the sour taste of paper chemicals. The kid closest to me cocked its head. "Tell," it said, impatience leaking out the edges. "Tell, so we can help you better." "I have too many," I said, and I pulled my left pocket inside out and let salt dust the ground in a lazy half circle. The kid stepped back, not dramatically, like a cat chooses to step out of the rain and make you think it was its idea. T forgot Rule 4 and said his name out loud, because that's what we do when asked politely by something smaller than us. The kid smiled, beautiful. They chanted his name, and when you hear your name chanted by a choir of almost children, you become the thing you were in grade school when a whole room said your name and you felt invincible and doomed. T's head tilted. The band around his wrist spun a little and let them in. I put my hand on his shoulder hard like Nurse had and squeezed until my fingers hurt. "Hold a word back," I said. "Quiet mean, or they'll build a ladder to your roof." He grunted. The chanting went out of tune, and the kids turned their heads in perfect, inhuman unison toward the slide with the teeth. "Don't bleed in the good sand," Nurse said. "They seed there. If you seed, you will not get a harvest you like." She was busy making a circle with something that looked like powdered glass. "Intercessor," she added, and pointed at the seesaw stain. "The leash is under there." I walked to the seesaw. The end down was heavier than a seesaw has any right to be. I got my shoulder under it and lifted with my legs and my soul, and something gave. Under the board, exactly under, lay a loop of chain that wasn't metal and wasn't rope. It had formed a circle so perfect you could have used it to teach geometry. In the circle, an impression, a hollow that had learned one shape and was hungry for it. Leroy's rule card pressed in my thigh like a breath. The nail weighed my pocket down like a guilt. "Make it remember," I whispered. I drove the nail into the exact center of the circle. The seesaw kicked. The loop snapped like an idea discredited with good evidence. The kid screamed in a joy that wasn't joy. They're fast, the enemy, when you spoil their game. 2 of them unzipped out of kid shapes and came at me with hands that were too long, too many knuckles. My band hummed, and I ducked wrong, and the first one got a finger in me. Not in my skin, in the place under the bone where we keep the part of us that recognizes the smell of our own pillow. It hooked something and pulled, and for a second, I left the room the way a person leaves a theater when a movie is still going and everyone watches you go. I reached for the only thing on me I hadn't used yet, the token. I know Rule 2. Keep it dry. If it gets wet, it remembers the flood and wants to go home. But this wasn't water. This was drowning. I unsocked it and pressed it against the thing's wrist. The token pulsed like a heartbeat learning a new rhythm. and the enemy's hand made a sound like rain on a tin roof if the rain had learned to be afraid. It recoiled. The nail hummed in the floorboards. The loop of knot rope unmade itself one small thread at a time, and the air cried a tiny cry like an old hinge relieved of its responsibility. The kids kept chanting, but they'd forgotten T. They were chanting a word that sounded like a number that isn't in our system. Nurse slapped two of them with something that wasn't her hand, and they fell apart like puddles negative. T breathed like he'd been held under for a count of 10, and his lungs were angry at the math. Back in the hall, the benches looked like kindness again. I didn't sit on those. I lay on a slab that had a crack down the middle, and the crack fit my spine like a track. The band tightened and then eased and then tightened, and this time it didn't ease, and I understood. This is what they mean by soul inhibiting. They don't care about your bones. They care if the instrument you are hits a sour note when they try to play you. They can't send sour back into the field because sour plays bad with the other instruments. They'll send you where you don't detract from the ensemble. They can't discharge you for limping. They'll discharge you for making the choir lose pitch. The musterer with kettle eyes came and pressed a finger to the place between my eyebrows. I saw a room with no doors, and the post-it lay on the floor in the middle of it, and it said, "You're allowed to hurt the right part if you pick it." I wanted to argue with a piece of paper. I wanted to tell it I had always picked the wrong parts. The musterer made the face my father used to make when I borrowed the car and brought it back with the petrol light on. "If you want out," he said, practical, "you hurt the hinge, not the door." "What does that mean?" I asked, and he did that not smile again. "You'll know when," he said, the way he'd said about the nail, and walked away because he had 100 people to keep from drowning in a place that doesn't have water, and I was just one. Third call out. In these stories, people always say they lost count. I didn't lose count. I am a counter. That's how I anchor. This was 3. A corridor that led to a ward that led to a room that had no corners. Corners are where dust shakes hands with itself. No corners meant no pity. The walls rose smooth like a thought you can't get purchase on. In the center, a thing that might have been a bed in a place where beds are for something other than sleeping. The smell was hospital and hot wire. A woman lay on the bed and looked like a person wrapped in a map whose roads ran in ink instead of tar. Her band had been cut, not fallen off. Cut. The line of the cut glowed like a match lit in a still room. "Don't say your name," nurse said. "She collects them now." We approached. She tilted her head and smiled a smile that said sorry 3 times and meant none. "I can take your pain," she offered. "It's what I used to do. I can take it and put it in me, and you can walk away clean." "No trades," nurse said firm. "When not at market." She handed me a pair of earplugs. "The orange foam. Put them in," she said. "You don't want to hear this in a way your ears can't forget." I rolled the foam down. It sprung back in the canal like a flower that had been patient. The woman talked, and the world muffled in a mercy way. I caught every third word. Door, father, lemon, bone, nuisance, promise. The band on my wrist sped its hum, and my heart synced up in a way that made me feel less alone. I poured a small circle of salt at the foot of the bed, and the foam plugs weren't enough. I heard, not with ears, with that place under memory, someone call my name. Not the father voice this time. "Leroy." The room changed temperature. My breath came out visible. "Don't," nurse said, and I looked down and my hand had risen of its own mind toward the woman's hand. She watched me like a cat watches a string. I kept my hand to myself, and she sighed, a long, tired sigh like smoke ringing a bell. "You won't leave," she said, directed at my emptiest place. "You think you will, but you won't. That's the joke. You'll go back where you came from, and nothing will taste right anymore. You'll step in your own door and see the shape of the thing you were before, and you'll think you can put it on, and it will laugh at you." She wasn't wrong. That was the worst part. It's easy to fight lies. It's hard to fight the truth when it's being used to make you let go of yourself. "How did you get out?" I asked, knowing she wasn't out. She smiled with all her teeth, and none of them pointed the right direction. "I didn't," she said. "I used the bench. The kind bench. My soul doesn't bend like it used to. They can't use me the way they want. I want for nothing now. She spread her hands, and nothing in the room moved to greet them. If you're so full, nurse said, why are you hungry? The woman flinched, and it went fast because she didn't like to let human micro-expressions touch her face anymore. We're done, nurse added to me. She's a sermon for someone else, not you. On the way out, I saw a wall of incident reports. That's what they were once you learn to see them. Paper pinned up, not human paper, but the idea of paper, messy handwriting that didn't belong to one hand. I can't not read when letters form. I scanned unconsciously and saw my name written twice. Once in my hand, once in something that had borrowed my hand. The dates didn't match the way this place does dates. Under my second name, 3-line notes. Patient, Alan Hugo, brought salt. Responds to instructions with imperfect compliance. Inserted nail at proper vector. Maintains a word. Behavioral hazard. Will refuse painless remedy when offered. Will seek painful one when not needed. Prognosis. Soul-inhibiting intervention pending. Anticipate departure within 6 recursions if hinge located. Hinge. Not door. The word walked around in me, knocking gently. A hinge holds weight in the small space. If you break the hinge, the door still exists, the frame still exists, but they don't talk to each other right anymore. That night, I lay on a not kind bench, and the post-it crawled out of my bag and up onto my chest like a small, polite pet. It said, if you want out, break the joint that lets you do the wrong thing easily. It didn't say which joint. It didn't say where. On the 4th call out, we went somewhere that was very clearly not a building, a stretch of ground with lines like crop marks, and on each intersection a person standing still, hands at sides, looking up at nothing. A musterer explained with a cup of water, because water is how you explain here. They're rigged to resonance, he said, and poured the cup into the dirt. The water didn't sink. It ran along the lines in a grid, and when it touched a toe, it sizzled. Not burned. Recorded. They're writing their own pain into the earth, he said, almost admiring. It's efficient. What do we do? I asked. You intercede, he said. You white out the words. Salt's for doors. This is for paper. He handed me a small brush. Horsehair, maybe. It smelled like an old bookstore with a leak. I knelt and brushed lightly along a line, and the paper equivalent made a sound like rain starting. The person standing on the intersection flinched. Sorry, I said, and didn't know who I was talking to. The enemy came not as bodies, but as pressure. My band's hum went high and thin like a mosquito. I put the brush down and used my hand because the edge of my hand knows the grammar of marginalia. We all used to cheat a little in the margins of our lives, and here it makes it useful. I smudged the line. It was sloppy work. It was enough. The person at that intersection took a breath you could hear down a hallway. His band sank into his skin. The grid dampened like cloth laid over a birdcage. When it was done, we were wrecked. Smudging what other people think counts as their project is hard, even when they're the enemy. Back in the hall, I looked at the benches and wanted to cry with gratitude because a thing that lets you sit is kind by default when your legs won't. I chose the wrong bench anyway. Not the kind one. The one with the splinter that gouged my lower back and reminded me I had skin and a place. The musterer came again, this time with a different face, same eyes. You want to go home? He said, like he was describing the weather. To report failure in one place as a success in another. You want to hack us, Hugo. You've always wanted to hack your schools and your jobs and your loves. He smiled in a way that said, I get it. It isn't hacking if you pay the bill. What's the bill? I asked. He touched the spot just left of my sternum. That's where you keep the hinge that lets you say yes to the thing that wants to be easy and pretend it's love, he said, casual like an old man explaining how to start a lawnmower. Break that and you can go. What happens to me after? I asked. He shrugged, a gesture that contained several centuries of tired. You'll be you with a door that doesn't swing back as far. You won't get in as much trouble. You won't get as much joy. He tilted his head. You'll be safe, if that's the word. You won't be the way you love being you when no one is watching. He was selling me something and telling the truth. That's extorvis. That's war. That's any army. That's any office. Pick the kind of hurt. I sat in the bunk room with the bottle nurse had given me with do not share my head and didn't open it. I put my hand to my chest where the hinge sat. I could feel it. It wasn't a heart. It was a little piece of door hardware made out of decisions. I pressed. It resisted like anything worth breaking. I pressed harder. In my mouth, the paper with my name, that constant bitter communion softened. I thought, is the hinge where my lying lives? Is it the hinge that lets me agree when I mean no? Is it the hinge that lets me look at the wrong bench and want to sit? I pushed. The pain came not like a pain. It came like a sound, an out-of-tune chime. And every part of me that had been built to resonate with the world and make music went a little off. I tasted penny. I smelled lemon from a childhood kitchen. I heard the post office fan cut the air. My band tightened, and then, instead of easing, it loosened like a belt after dinner. Don't do anything irreversible, nurse said, stepping in front of me with her eyes wide enough to show more white than I'd seen yet. You do it now, and you might get what you want. You also might tear something that we can't stitch. Wait until you mean it for the right reason. What's a right reason? I asked, and the question told me I still wasn't ready. You'll know when, she said, and laughed at herself because she knew how useless that sounded, and she was right, and she was kind, and the combination is rarer than policy ever admits. The fifth call-out was a trench, or so it wanted us to think. Dirt, mud, rain that couldn't make up its mind. Figures in helmets running in that slow, molasses human way. The enemy loves a reenactment that hurts. Don't run, nurse said. If you run here, you run forever. We walked in the trench, and the mud sucked at our boots, and sometimes the ground was the house is a house again, and the slats of knives. I put the nail through 2 more shadows and got good at feeling where a shadow wanted to go when it got scared. T almost shared water with a figure whose face looked exactly like his mother's and caught himself like a hand caught a vase before it falls and shatters. The band let him keep the catch. At the far end, a man sat with his hands folded on his knees like someone waiting for a bus that was always late. Intercessor, he said, polite. You're late. I know, I said. I was learning. He smiled without being cruel. Trade, he asked, and his voice was mild. A story you hate for a pain you keep. He was the market master of a stall that sold what you could never carry. He didn't have eyes like polished coal. He had eyes like mine. I held the word back and shook my head, and he nodded like he'd expected that and said, too bad, and the trench turned left without turning, and there was the hall again. Catalog, benches, band. The post-it in my pocket warmed and cooled in a breathing rhythm, and I realized it was matching me. It hadn't learned to talk. It had learned to keep time. How long was I there? Long enough for the taste of my name to become normal. Long enough for the smell of the lake to be home. Long enough for nurses' hands to look like safety, even when they put me where it hurt. Long enough to want to sit on the kind bench and not do it, and for the wanting to get faint like an old scar. It was a muster I hadn't seen, yet who finally gave me the last part. He wasn't kettle-eyed. His eyes looked like coins rubbed thin. He stopped at my bed and said, you know the clause. He meant the letter, the appeal denial, the line I tried to pretend wasn't there. You know what gets you out? I'm not here to tell you to do it. He leaned in. I'm here to tell you what it costs. Tell me, I said. I'm greedy like that. I want the bill itemized. You break the hinge, and you won't be able to love the way you did, he said. You'll be able to go through life without smashing into yourself. You'll be tidy. You'll be the kind of man who avoids some pain and all the songs. You won't hurt people the old ways. You will hurt them new ways. You'll watch the river and not want to jump in even on the good days, which sounds like a blessing until you're on the bank needing to wade. He patted the band at my wrist. You'll go home and make your bed with corners so sharp you could shave. You'll make tea. You'll answer no calls after midnight. You'll never sit on the kind bench again, even when it is kind. I stared at the ceiling until the non-corners found me. And if I don't, I asked. You'll stay, he said, easy. You're not useless here. Your salt lines are careful. You use the nail like you mean it. You keep a word. You'll be the man who wears out shoes on this floor. You'll go on 9th, 10th, 20th call-outs until you forget how to count. Not because you actually forgot, but because numbers will stop matching. You'll stop wanting to hurt your hinge because you'll forget you have doors at all. Those are both a kind of dying, I said. Yes, he said, pleased at the accuracy. We fight wars here with souls, Hugo. There are casualties either way. T went home. He didn't tell me he was going. I woke up, and his bunk had the clean recess that beds get when someone gets out and someone else hasn't yet gotten in. There was a circle of salt on the pillow. He could have used it the night before, and he didn't. It was a note we both understood. He'd found his hinge and broken it, and they'd marked him down and stamped him as unsuitable for the field. The band leaves a scar. I touched the place on my wrist where mine would leave mine. We went on a 6 call-out because there's always one more. A factory where conveyor belts had learned the rosary and said it wrong. A child in the rafters who had built a house out of waiting. A man with 1,000 paper cuts on his forearms, and each cut read a line from a questionnaire. How often do you feel like you? How many drinks in a week? How many nights do you think of doing it and then don't? I used the brush. I poured the salt. I kept my water. I refused the trade offerings. I pinned a shadow. I walked out and chose the bench with the splinter and looked at Nurse, and she looked tired in her mouth, but not in her eyes. You won't do it here, she said, conversational, as she changed the dressing on a wound that was not mine. You're thinking you'll decide, and then you'll press. You won't. This place respects your surface too much. It wants the choice to happen where there's bread and traffic. Do people come back? I asked because I needed the picture. All the time, she said. Sometimes for a visit. Sometimes for good. Some people like to sit on the kind bench as a treat when they've been strong all week. She made a face. They don't stay strong long. A week later, I measure like that to keep my head oriented. They lined us up for catalog, and the band on my wrist did something it had never done. It warmed. It cooled. It made a small sound like a click. Alan, Hugo, the dispatcher said, 3 voices in a braid, and tapped. Pending departure. I should have felt joy. What I felt was an ache so deep I had to sit down and pretend I dropped something so no one would see my legs go. Nurse was there before I could fake it. She put her palm on my chest, right over the hinge. Don't be brave and stupid, she said. Be scared and correct. What do I know it took? I asked. You'll know when, she said, and we both had the grace to smile. 2 doors. One was a mirror and one was a mouth. They always look like that at the end of anything. The band on my wrist loosened. A musterer snipped it with a pair of scissors that had belonged to someone's grandmother. The glyphs unspooled like a trick rope and sank into the floor and were gone. He held up the band, and it wasn't a band anymore. It was a line, and the line wrote my name in the air, and then the letters ate themselves in a polite way. The cut on my wrist glowed a little, then didn't. The scar would come later. Don't touch water on the way out, Nurse said. Unless you mean to drown. She pressed the post-it into my hand. It was ordinary, suddenly. Yellow, a little oily at the edge. Make a scan of that weird letter, it said in my hand. The old job. It likes you, she added, as if she was giving me a dog none of her other kids could take care of. I stepped through the mouth. The air on the other side tasted like dust and sun. My apartment smelled like lemon oil and old toast and the faint ghost of burned sugar from a year ago when I destroyed a batch of caramel thinking I could eyeball a thermometer. The kettle sat on the stove where I'd left it under a different set of lights. My footlocker was closed. The Tupperware was on the table. The token lay inside it like a tide pool thing that had become a piece of beach glass. The post had stuck to my monitor and said what it had always said. Make a scan of that weird letter. I laughed and cried at the same time because that's a thing you do when you land from a great height and don't break both legs. It took an hour to remember that I couldn't call anyone. Who would I tell? I've been away, I'd say, and they'd say, I know, you posted some photos of soup. I sat at the table with my hands flat and looked at the hinge. I could feel under my skin like an ingrown hair. I could feel it because I'd met it over there, and over there had taught me to touch the parts of myself I'd studiously ignore to keep moving. The band mark on my wrist throbbed once like it had a heartbeat. Now, I asked the empty room. Funny, in both places I talked to rooms. The apartment answered the way places do when you've been gone. It ran a finger over your spine and said you look different. I put my hand to my chest, left of sternum, and pressed. It hurt like you'd think breaking anything would hurt. Not like a knife, like a hinge, like the little screws and the little plates that make a door swing got hot and soft, and then snapped one by one. The sound of my head went out of tune and then settled in a new key. My mouth filled with the taste of paper and my name dissolved in it. Tears came because my face can tell the truth even when my mouth can't. I let them. The room did a thing. It shivered. The corners felt further away. The air changed the way it changes when a bus pulls away and leaves an exhaust that blooms and then thins. I sat very still. My phone made a noise. A message from an no caller ID. Appeal granted, it said, the words flat as a stamp, and I laughed hard enough to scare the neighbor's cat that had crept onto my windowsill to see if I brought milk. I didn't answer any calls after midnight. Not because the rule told me to, because the hinge is broken and the door won't swing to let them in anymore. This is the cost. When my father rang at 9, I answered, and when he made a joke I'd heard him make 100 times, I laugh the way you laugh when you've decided to be kind because that's what you can do. I sleep, and I don't dream the hallway with the eyes behind the keyholes as much. When I do, I walk past and no one opens a door. A week later, in the post box under the circular window, with a crack you could fit a thumbnail in, I found a card. Government paper. Australian normal. This is to confirm your discharge. It said from Extorvis. It didn't say Extorvis. It said nothing at all about other places. It used a return address that was a mixture of glyphs that my eyes glanced off because the hinge broke in the exact spot that would have made looking feel like a duty. The signature looked like it belonged to a person. The ink was black, not purple. The stamp was a circle with a wreath. The wreath did not wriggle. I rubbed the corner with my thumb. Normal paper. It left a little of itself on my finger, the way old paper does when it has been manhandled by 1,000 thumbs. I taped the card to the inside of the cupboard above the sink where I keep cups. Whenever I open the door, I see it and think, that's not proof of anything. It's just a thing a bureaucracy does when it remembers to close a file. Proof is the way my chest feels. Proof is the way the kind bench at the bus stop looks like a bench and not like a trap. Proof is how much I miss the particular brightness of a certain way I used to be. The way you miss a dangerous dog you had to give away because you kept bleeding and you couldn't explain the bandages to your neighbors. Every now and then, at 2:37 a.m., the post-it rustles. I tell it to go back to sleep. When it says nothing, I smile. In the morning, I fold salt into a paper envelope and put it in my left pocket. I don't know why. Habit. Ritual. Maybe habit is just a way to keep time with yourself when the clock you used before won't run anymore. Some afternoons when it rains, I put the token on the table and watch the condensation curl around the glass and not touch it. The token stays dry because water remembers the flood and I don't want it to. Sometimes I take out the nail and lay it next to the token and think about shadows. The nail is bent. I keep it that way. Straight nails going easier. Bent nails have stories, and stories are heavy enough here to hold down what wants to skitter off the table and under the fridge and call itself a mouse. When I walk past the post office, the clerk looks at me and doesn't look at me. We are in a club. Our dues are paid in a currency that isn't on Earth. He raises a finger, sometimes in a salute that could be scratching an itch. I nod. He never asks how it was. He doesn't need to. He can see I'm walking without the old swing. He can hear the key of me has changed. You want to know if I regret it. You want to know if it was worth it. That's what people always want to know when you tell a story like this into a microphone with a red light. If I say no and it was worth it, I make you believe there's nobility in breaking your hinge. If I say yes and it wasn't, I make you feel better about the hinge you keep. Both are lies. Both are true. I hold myself like a door that opens one way. I don't bang into walls as much. I don't fling wide in a storm. I don't slam just to hear the echo. I miss the slam sometimes. The world is quieter without it. The world is easier to live in. That's a different kind of horror than the one with shadows. It's the kind with calendars. I write this the way every survivor writes. Fast, like if I stop, I'll forget, and slow, like drawing a line around a bruise. I told you I hated war. I still do, but I understand the trick now. They told me, and then they made me learn it with my hands. Wars in Extorvis aren't fought with soldiers' bodies. They're fought with souls.